Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? Soulless in Seattle. So a priest, a pregnant mother, and an 84-year-old woman walk into a protest, and unfortunately, it's no joke. They get pepper sprayed at Occupy. The cops say, don't worry, pepper spray, quote, is not age-specific, no more dangerous to someone who is 10 or someone who is 80. Our guest, 84-year-old pepper spray victim Dorli Rainey. Occupy Wall Street regroups.
Take down the barricade!
Plans to shut down Wall Street itself in the morning, to occupy the subways in the afternoon, to occupy Courthouse Square at night.
Tomorrow is a very big day. It's a day of international action.
But it was the NYPD which did the occupying to a New York City councilman.
I went down to the park to observe that situation. Unfortunately, I was assaulted by a police officer.
And then denied counsel and detained for 17 hours. Our guest, New York City Councilman Ydanis Rodriguez. Occupy Cal goes back on campus, and 3,500 people listen to former Labor Secretary Robert Reich.
The days of apathy are over, folks.
Yeah! Our guest, Robert Reich. As middle-class neighborhoods vanish and the Republicans threaten to renege on the supercommittee deal, the Congressional Progressive Caucus hears startling news from a top economist.
The median male earnings in the United States peaked in 1973.
Our guest, CPC co-chair, Congressman Raul Grijalva. You mean oops, don't you? Just say oops and get out. Newt Gingrich caught in hypocrisy, astounding even if you're a newt.
And if you want to put people in jail, I want to second what Michelle said. You ought to start with Barney Frank and Chris Dodd. The Barney Frank's case, go back and look at the lobbyists he was close to at Freddie Mac.
Freddie Mac? It now proves Freddie Mac paid Gingrich's company $1.6 million. Just say oops and get out.
First of all, it wasn't paid to me.
And more cane brain drain pain. He claims he offered Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, then says that was a joke, then says, I'm not supposed to know anything about foreign policy. Or as Letterman put it,
here now is what happened to Herman Cain's brain. Watch.
So you agreed with President Obama on Libya or not?
Okay, Libya.
All that and more now on Countdown.
Got all this stuff twirling around in my head.
Good evening from New York. This is Wednesday, November 16th, 356 days until the 2012 presidential election. Occupy Wall Street showing resilience. Occupy protesters elsewhere showing theirs too, especially 84-year-old Dorli Rainey, pepper sprayed by Seattle police last night in a crowd that also included a pregnant woman and a priest. The fifth story on the countdown, Occupy Wall Street regrouping after Tuesday morning shutdown of their camp at Zuccotti Park, preparing for an international day of action tomorrow, with protests planned in many Occupy cities, including New York, L.A., Portland, London, and Madrid, after protesters in Baltimore tried to occupy Bush's brain. Karl Rove. Starting tonight in Seattle, this is Dorli Rainey, 84-year-old activist, self-described old lady in combat boots. She was hit with pepper spray last night when she stopped to check out an Occupy Seattle protest. Occupy Seattle reporting that a priest and a pregnant woman also pepper sprayed after protesters blocking downtown streets were attacked by the police. There were 6 arrests. Dorli was not one of them. Seattle police spokesman Jeff Capel tried to defend the action, saying pepper spray, quote, is not age-specific, no more dangerous to someone who is 10 or someone who is 80. Dangerous to someone who is a fetus? Activist Dorli Rainey will be our guest in just a few moments. At Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, a spray of blather, not pepper spray, from Karl Rove interrupted abruptly when Occupy protesters called for a mic check before reminding Rove of his credentials, architect of Occupy Iraq and Occupy Afghanistan. Karl didn't like that.
We are the 99%.
You want to keep jumping up and yelling, you're the 99%? How presumptuous and arrogant can you think you are?
No, you're not. Karl, did you say all that? What a guy. By the way, the answer to your first question, Karl, who gave them the right to occupy America? The Constitution. I know you'd never read it, but there's some good stuff in there. Zuccotti Park looking sadly empty this morning. Just police, security guards, and a handful of demonstrators to start with, while other Occupy protesters lined up at a sanitation garage to retrieve what was left of their property after police and sanitation workers had carted it off. The Zuccotti Library wants at least 4,000 books, maybe 5,500, reduced to a few boxes in this picture. Perhaps New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg could add them to his library. He might use them to look up something he's never seen before, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Documents that seem to have been read in Boston, where a judge today granted Occupy a temporary restraining order that would keep the city from closing down the camp at Dewey Square without first getting a court order. While in Philadelphia, the Occupy camp at Dilworth Plaza has received a different sort of order, an eviction notice to clear the ground so a renovation project can start there. Back at Zuccotti, Occupy Wall Street protesters putting yesterday's crackdown behind them and preparing for major protests tomorrow.
Obviously, when you're looking at the park, it's a little bit empty, so of course you're going to think, oh no, it's over. No, absolutely not. We have the internet, and we use it, so I mean, it's far from over.
The presence is smaller today. A lot of people are sleeping, and a lot of people are preparing for tomorrow. Tomorrow is a very big day. It's a day of international action on November 17th.
That includes plans to shut down streets in and around downtown Los Angeles and to march from the Occupy camp at London's St. Paul's Cathedral, which is also facing eviction. And while Occupy Oakland's camp is closed, Iraq War veteran and Occupy activist Scott Olson is on the way back, releasing his first photo since he was hit with a police tear gas canister last month. Also this statement: I'm feeling a lot better with a long road in front of me after my freedom of speech was quite literally taken from me. My speech is coming back, but I've got a lot of work to do with rehab. Thank you for all your support. It has meant the world to me. You'll be hearing more from me in the near future, and soon enough, we'll see you in our streets. Every time you might think you had seen the worst of the establishment's response to Occupy, somebody, somewhere, is willing to bet you you have not. Let's go to Seattle, where Occupy protesters were pepper sprayed last night. Among them, political activist and Occupy Seattle supporter Dorli Rainey. It's a great pleasure to have you on the program tonight.
Thank you, Keith. It is a pleasure to be here.
Before we get into last night, we've seen the pictures, so the obvious question is, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I feel so energized. It's amazing what a little pepper spray will do for you.
It seems to have that effect on people who know they're in the right. How did you get involved in all that last night? Can you tell us?
Well, first of all, I've been involved in all these actions, whether it was civil rights, the women's rights, and now this. So this is a natural progression for me. And I was in D.C. with the October 2011 group from the 6th to the 10th of October, which was exhilarating to hear these great speakers that we had there. When I came back, I was totally overcharged to start working here. So yesterday, I was on my way to one of these boring transportation meetings. When I got off my bus to change to another one, I heard tons of helicopters overhead. You could not hear yourself think. And I thought, well, there's probably Occupy Seattle is doing an action there to help out Occupied Wall Street. And I decided to go up there and check it out, and sure enough, right in front of the Nordstrom store at the big intersection, there was, first of all, an army of police officers, bicycles, cars, lights, etc. And the people were in the center of that intersection, blocking traffic all around. A lot of my friends were there, and my friends consist of all age groups, all colors. No matter what some of the media say that they're rats and they're crazy and druggies, etc., that is just not so. So I stood around there with my friends, and we were just deciding that we had stayed there long enough and we might go on. Well, we're not a secret society, and when somebody says, mic check, everybody can hear it. And the cops also knew that we were on the verge of leaving. just at that moment, the bike patrol came up and shoved bicycles into the crowd, moving them to the center. And simultaneously they let go of the pepper spray, and in the pictures you can see where the pepper spray came all over. So I got pepper sprayed and shoved, and thank heavens there was a wonderful young Iraq veteran who stood next to me, and he grabbed me as I stumbled, as people were pushing. People couldn't see where they were going. The cops kept pushing with the bicycles, and the space we were in got smaller and smaller, so we were really penned in. And that young man stabilized me. Otherwise, I would have been on the ground, trampled. Good. And this really is not a good picture to think about. So after that, then some people helped me to go back to the bus, and I went home. But the great thing is that I ride these buses an awful lot, and some of the people, I see them at least once or twice a week on the bus. Hello, how are you? And they said, what happened to you? I had no mirror, so I must have looked a fright. and the bus driver said, hey, what happened to you? I said, I got pepper sprayed by Seattle's finest. And the other people piped up and said, oh, that's terrible. And the wonderful thing that happened was this bus full of people started talking about Occupy. And they had never seen a real person that they could identify with who got pepper sprayed. And it became a really wonderful educational opportunity for me to convert a busload full of people to our way of thinking.
Is that your hope for what this is going to do for America, that it's going to, more than anything else, going to educate people to what they're up against?
We have to do that, and with the time is of the essence. We are seeing the FCC now trying to take away the free internet. I remember Goebbels. I remember the time I grew up over there, and I remember the shrinking of the print media. And we had one newspaper, and it was called the Völkische Beobachter, the People's Observer, and it was the same from North Germany down to South Austria. Same propaganda. We're winning the war, we're sinking the U-boats, and we're into Scotland. And so we were doing so well. It's amazing how long the war lasted after we were winning it already. And I see the same thing happening here. We have really no more free media that will bring you the issues instead of just the soft fluff entertainment, the repeated stuff about some actress somewhere being pregnant and not pregnant and wanting to go get married and not. This should be on the entertainment pages, but not on the mainstream news media. So we have such incredible issues here. Right here in our town, we live 20 miles from Ground Zero, the Bangor missile base. And in order to get any attention from any media, we go there and we occupy the street going into the missile base. And we get arrested there, and nobody cares. Nobody says anything except the people who want to drive in and out of the base and earn their living there. They don't much like us. But we have, one of my heroes was a Catholic nun who spread her blood on a missile silo in Colorado and got incarcerated. And then she did an action in Tennessee and got incarcerated. Her name was Jackie Hudson. She recently died, and a lot of it was the cause of the mistreatment in the prison system in Tennessee. She used to say, whatever you do, take one more step out of your comfort zone. And that is what I do. I take a step out of my comfort zone. It was so easy to say, well, I'm going to retire, I'm going to sit around, watch television, or eat bonbons. But somebody's got to keep them awake and let them know what is really going on in this world, whether it's J.P. Morgan doing the financing plan for our ill-fated tunnel, which is coming up, which the city council, some member even admitted they never read the environmental impact statement because it is boring. Well, I read the whole dang thing, and my eyeballs are still pink from reading it. And nobody talks about these things. They are not in the media, and the Chamber of Commerce pushes things like our tunnel because they will earn big profits when they start developing the properties around there, when the viaduct is gone. And the taxpayers are online for this. And so I'm an issues person, I always have been. So, is this what you wanted to hear?
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
No, that's you have answered all of my questions. And you're one of my heroes now. Dorli Rainey, political activist, Occupy Seattle supporter, and one of those punk kids out there on the streets. An honor to have you on the program. Keep going one step outside your comfort zone. We'll try to do the same thing here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back. How does a New York City councilman not only wind up bruised and bloodied and arrested at Occupy Wall Street, but then detained for 17 hours without access to his lawyer, and the mayor pretends nothing untoward has happened? Councilman Ydanis Rodriguez joins me next. This is Countdown. First, my apologies to former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, whom we were to interview tonight about his address to Occupy Cal. I think even he would agree now. There's no way we should have interrupted Dorli Rainey. It's not just why was the city councilman roughed up and arrested at Occupy Wall Street. It's why was he roughed up and arrested at Occupy Wall Street, then denied a lawyer, then detained for 17 hours. He joins me next. The disappearing middle class. It's not just a figure of speech anymore. The middle class neighborhoods are vanishing. CPC co-chair Raul Grijalva joins me. For 3 years, Newt Gingrich has insisted that any politician with a connection to Freddie Mac should give back the money or go to jail or something. Now it turns out Freddie Mac paid him $1,600,000 over 8 years to act as a historian on housing or something. And now his wife has an uncomfortable pause. Unfortunately, that's when asked if he would make a good president, but he can still top it. Today's quote from Miami's Little Havana: "How do you say delicious in Cuban?" Oh boy. There's an old Charles Addams cartoon in which an octopus is shown climbing out from under a manhole cover, grabbing a pedestrian, and who is then seen trying to batter it with his umbrella. The caption read, "It doesn't take much to draw a crowd in New York." In our fourth story, you would think the arrest of a New York City councilman at Occupy Wall Street and his injury at the hands of the police and his detention for 17 hours without access to a lawyer might draw, if not a crowd, at least a comment from the mayor who ordered the raid that resulted in his arrest. Nearly 48 hours later, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg is still silent. Councilman Rodriguez says late Monday night he heard that the police were planning the raid, so he decided to go to the park to act as an observer. He was still 2 blocks away when an officer grabbed him from behind, threw him to the ground, and pushed his face into the ground, he says.
I was walking in the street, in the sidewalk, and this police officer, 7188, started hitting my back, committing another case of police brutality as one of those few apples that we have in the NYPD department.
Councilman Ydanis Rodriguez was then held 17 hours without access to a lawyer. Yesterday, he held a news conference flanked by other government officials and still bearing the evidence of his violent altercation, cuts and bruises on his face and arms.
Throughout my 20 years of public service, no elected official has been held in detention for longer than 3 hours. His rights were violated. The Constitution was suspended today from Zuccotti Park to here at 100 Center Street, and there needs to be a full and complete investigation.
And joining me now, New York City Council member Ydanis Rodriguez. Well, thanks for coming in. I'm glad you were available this evening rather than still in jail. My goodness. How on earth did this happen?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this program.
Of course.
And it is so unfortunate that still today there was people at the court waiting to come out from the system. And I mean, this should not happen.
Yeah.
And it is so sad that Mayor Bloomberg took this decision on trying to shut this Occupy down from the park.
Nothing from him, even though a member of the city council was arrested. Nothing from the police commissioner, even though the member of the city council is still bearing the visible scars of an altercation with the cops. Nothing? You've heard nothing from them?
Nothing at all. I know that the Speaker, Queens, they made a phone call from yesterday to the mayor, deputy mayor, to the Commissioner Kelly. I also was shocked on what happened, not only to me, but the more than 200, including 9 members of the media. To get the same car where I was taken to the NYPD headquarters, there were 2 reporters that they do freelance for Associated Press and New York Times that they also went through the same situation of being arrested without planning to be arrested.
Where do you go with this from here? Do you know? Is it legal action? Is it a hearing? How do you proceed?
Well, first of all, I'm here also understanding that what happened to me didn't have to happen, not because I'm a council member, but also because I'm a citizen who also is protected by the First Amendment. I only went to the park to observe the situation. And suddenly I ended being in jail without, as you say, without having the legal right or not having speaking to my attorney. Even when I asked to speak to a supervisor with the NYPD, no one. It was not granted, and as someone, as elected official, also has been trying to work with the NYPD. It is so frustrating.
Where are average New Yorkers on this, do you think? I mean, so far, as near as we can tell, Occupy Wall Street filled up a public space, marched in a couple of streets, blocked a little bit of traffic. The NYPD has in response arrested about 1,000 people, often with violence that was rarely necessary. They bulldozed a camp in the middle of the night. They brought paramilitary weapons out against members of the public, including huge sound devices when the complaint was that these people were making too much noise. And they arrested about 10 or 12, depending on the number varies, of journalists who had New York City issued police press credentials, and they hit and arrested and detained a city councilman. Where is the outrage in the city about how the city is treating its residents, its journalists, its city council members?
Well, I believe that New Yorkers are frustrated, basically, especially because this movement is not only the movement of college students. This movement, the Occupy movement, the 99% is a movement of the working class and the middle class that is tired, that is fed up on being affected by every year when we have to make decisions about cutting the budget. It is only on the working class and the middle class. So I believe that this movement will continue growing. I believe that this movement is a movement for jobs, for affordable housing, for quality education. I represent one of those communities where the average income is 25% in the Northern Manhattan area. So for me, my responsibility to support the Occupy movement is based on the need that I see every day in my community. It's because I feel that here in New York City, as a typical city that we have in this great nation, there's a gap between the rich and the poor. And I believe it is our responsibility to bring all the sectors together. And that's the voice that this movement has been giving us. It's the voice of the voiceless.
Having been born in Inwood myself, and my folks are all from the Bronx, and I've lived here most of my adult life, the potholes are as bad as they've ever been. Mass transit is getting worse, and it costs more every week. The city bends over backwards for businesses, especially high-profile businesses like films and other places like that. Taxes go up on residents every hour and a half, it feels like, and now this mayor pulls, it seems like a fascist stunt to knock down protests, where somebody says, hey, we've had enough. We're not rioting in the streets. We just had enough. And they bring to bear an extraordinary amount of police presence and pressure and threat and people in riot gear. Is there any intelligence on the part of the people who are making these decisions, rather than saying there's a problem here, we need to address it before it becomes an unmanageable problem? Are they playing with fire in this city, the people who run it?
I believe that this mayor is showing one more time that he's disconnected from the reality of the average New Yorkers. I believe that he doesn't understand that by shooting the Occupy from the park, from trying to shooting the park down, he thought that it would be the end of the movement. Tomorrow, thousands of people will be arrested because they will be participating in the nationwide civil disobedience. But not only is those couple of thousand people that already have decided to be arrested in an organized way in a civil disobedience manner, it's also thousands of labor leaders, community activists, religious leaders in New York City, in many cities in this nation, that they are showing the support to this movement. And that's what this mayor doesn't understand it. No one will be able to stop this movement unless we come out with answers to the reality that we face in this city. Why? We have certain community where family doesn't know what it is quality education in the early childhood. Why we have community that we don't have affordable housing. In our districts, in the northern Manhattan, from the 175 affordable housing units that the mayor said that he will build, only one building has been built in my district. So this is unfair. This mayor is not connected to this reality. Unfortunately, we've been going through this situation. I went through as a council member, but also Jomani Williams also went through a similar situation 2 or 3 months ago. And every day, hundreds of New Yorkers, they're being stopped and frisked, especially in the Latino and the Afro-American community. And we need to put a stop on how certain member of the NYPD that does not reflect the great work that most of the officers does at the department, they are not respecting the right. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why this Occupy movement is gaining so much support from all community across the city.
Well, perhaps the mayor will understand this time tomorrow night. Councilman Ydanis Rodriguez of New York, I'm glad it's turned out relatively well, and great thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, sir.
The head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on alarming numbers of the shrinking middle class and the shrinking middle class neighborhoods and the value of the Occupy movement in correcting that. Coming up. A good conspiracy theorist would suggest that the move against Occupy has taken place now so there'd be nobody to protest when the supercommittee starts gutting the safety net next week. I'm a good conspiracy theorist. Ahead with Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chair Raul Grijalva. First, the sanity break-in on this date, 1963, the phone company, there was only the one, began to roll out a test of a new product without which cell phones would have been inconceivable. Customers in the towns of Carnegie and Greensburg, Pennsylvania, were offered the first ever touch-tone phones. No dial, no dialing. They cost extra, of course, and in many cases they required entirely new wiring. And a majority of home telephones would still be the old rotary dial jobs well into the 1980s. Time marches on. We begin with the TMO adorable clip of the day. In a bizarre twist on Lady and the Tramp, this dog and parrot are sharing some pasta. Molly wants spaghetti. From the look on the dog's face, I'm thinking he's thinking about following up the spaghetti with some parrot. Bird. If you think this is cute, you should have seen after dinner when they went dancing. From dogs and birds to the world of cats. And this cat's trying to enjoy his day, but the phone, the rotary phone, won't stop ringing. Fine. I'll get it. You would think having a cat who can answer the phone would be a good thing, but apparently he takes terrible messages. The handwriting is just like, cat scratches. Finally, we check in, as we always do, with Panama City, Florida. Here we have a news report about an attempted robbery followed by a high-speed chase. Fortunately, there was an eyewitness on the scene.
He came in Dukes of Hazzard, getting it, digging like that, like Dale Jr., and then hooked up and shot forward, and when he hooked up and shot forward, that's when he came and hit.
Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. Time marches on. The CPC fights back, and Newt Gingrich wants all politicians in bed with Freddie Mac incarcerated, except, of course, himself. Coming up. The rich get rich, the poor get poorer, the middle class, it seems to be disappearing, not just economically, but geographically. In our third story on the countdown, as Occupy underscores the debate over income inequality, and it grows louder in this country, a new study showing that the gap between rich and poor is indeed widening, while some in Congress struggle to focus attention on the need to create jobs to try to stem the growing financial disaster. On Capitol Hill, the Congressional Deficit Reduction Supercommittee is racing to complete a plan to gut $1 trillion from the federal deficit before next week's deadline, but the Congressional Progressive Caucus says the committee is not addressing the real problem. Today, that caucus held its own hearings in an attempt to shift focus from taxes and cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security to job creation.
The median male earnings in the United States peaked in 1973. The employment in manufacturing peaked in 1979. And we have lost 9 million jobs in manufacturing from that peak. This is a structural crisis. It requires a structural transformation.
Also today, a new study from Stanford supporting this need for job creation to bridge the growing gap between rich and poor. Rising income inequality, the study says, has left a higher share of families in neighborhoods that are mostly low income or mostly affluent, nothing in between. Specifically, 1/3 of American families live in areas of either affluence or poverty, up from just 15% just 4 decades ago. Only 44% now living in neighborhoods defined as middle income. It was 65% in 1970. Why does that matter? According to the study, the increasing isolation of the affluent from the low and moderate income families means that a significant portion of society's resources are concentrated in a smaller and smaller portions of neighborhoods. Joining me now after those hearings, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Democratic Congressman Raul Grijalva of Arizona. Always a pleasure, sir. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate it.
What do these new statistics mean? What does it mean? I mean, it suggests a kind of stratifying of where people live relative to how much money they make. But what are the other implications here?
For our society, the implications are frightening, that we are now heading in a direction, Keith, in which we will have a permanent underclass, a group, large portions of the American people that will feel that there is no opportunity for them to aspire to be middle class, to aspire to move their lives on. And if we continue to gut the support programs and the investment programs of this nation, education, the support programs like Social Security and Medicare, we continue to gut those programs, then that picture becomes dimmer and dimmer as we go on. Our hearing was about bringing expert economists to talk about the reality in America, and one after another, including the Millionaire Patriot Organization that was present as well, indicated that we must create jobs, we must have a fair tax system, and the rich have to pay their share that they have not been paying for a decade plus. It was a simple way to tell the super committee there is an alternative out there. Don't be afraid of it. The American people are expecting something big. If we come back, the super committee comes back with just cuts, or comes back with less than a real plan for job creation, I think the disappointment will not be that they didn't cut enough. The disappointment among the American people will be a huge backlash. You didn't do anything, and you didn't create opportunity or jobs.
You spoke out yesterday against the decision in New York to oust Occupy from Zuccotti Park. Why is it so important that the demonstrators have that protest, have that right to do it, and why is it especially important at this moment in our history?
Well, I've said a couple of times, and I think I've heard you repeat it, the light that the occupiers have shown on the whole issue of this economy and this whole society has been the issue of fairness. Whether it is the wage disparity, whether it's the income disparity, whether it is the concentration of wealth and power in one small section of our society, they've made people think about that, and they've made that the issue. And so their space there is not just symbolism. Not only do they have the right to be there, but the discomfort that they're creating for Wall Street, the discomfort they're creating for the mayor, pales to the discomfort we see out in America. People losing their homes, 25 million people out of work or wanting to work full time. Kids can't go to school anymore because they can't afford it, and our poverty rate continues to soar. That's the real discomfort in America. And by the occupiers pointing out fairness and creating some discomfort for the elite, whether it's in New York, whether it's the economic or political elite of New York, is nothing compared to the reality out in America.
I don't want to sound like I'm underemphasizing any of this, but this is the first time we've spoken in a while, and I can't finish this interview without asking you about the TV special the other night on another member of your Arizona House delegation, Gabby Giffords, and especially the audio tape. I was overwhelmed in a very positive way with how good she sounded. Give me your impressions of how far she's gotten and how she is.
No, it was uplifting. It was affirming. And when Gabby said, I want to go back to work, I've said all along that she is going to join us again in Congress and work. And so I believe her. Anybody shouldn't doubt her word. It's not, this is about real grit. This is about real courage. And so it has been an uplifting moment for all of us, and those of us who have the pleasure of knowing her are just feel that it's an affirmation that, that the human spirit is what it is, and it's personified in what she's gone through and what she will accomplish when it's all over.
And it's pretty useful now at this point, too, because it reminds you that you can change the circumstances almost no matter what they are.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Representative Raul Grijalva of Arizona, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Always our great pleasure to have you, sir. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bill O'Reilly defends his fact-free history of the Lincoln assassination by blaming Al Franken. Worst person's coming up.
It's half off at Joseph A. Bank. The entire stock of executive.
Newt Gingrich has been obsessed for 3 years with politicians who took money from or acted on behalf of Freddie Mac, demanded Obama give his Freddie Mac money back, said Chris Dodd and Barney Frank should go to jail for passing legislation that helped Freddie Mac. Today we learned that over 8 years, Newt Gingrich got $1,600,000 from Freddie Mac. Markos Moulitsas on that. And if your wife makes that face when she's asked if you'd make a good president, you're not going to get to find out if you'd make a good president, are you? The worst first on Countdown. Quote, how do you say delicious in Cuban? Herman Cain's daily gaffirmation. Next, first because sadly, this is close as these miscreants will get to affirmation or gaffirmation. Here, Countdown top 3 nominees for today's worst persons in the world. The bronze to Billo the Clown. We told you Monday about the decision by the Lincoln Museum in Ford's Theater to not sell his new book, Killing Lincoln, because most of it seems to have been made up. Billo went on a show and tried to lie his way out of the disaster. First, he called Senator Al Franken a liar, which is interesting since Franken's got nothing to do with this. And the last time O'Reilly tried to do anything with Franken and sued him, the judge literally laughed O'Reilly out of court. Then Billo added, "No, we have attacks on my new book, Killing Lincoln." The Washington Post saying the bookstore at Ford's Theater in Washington where Lincoln was assassinated is refusing to sell the book. That's not true. Bill, by the way, seemed to be drunk on the air when he said this. He then read an email from the head of the shop at Ford's Theater saying the book had been available there for weeks. What he did was conflate that the bookstore in the basement was also part of the museum. The museum will not sell his book because historically it is a piece of crap that says Lincoln met Ulysses S. Grant in the Oval Office in 1865, even though the Oval Office wasn't built till 1909. Where they are selling it is in the gift shop at Ford's Theater, where it is available along with the Dangle Legs Lincoln, an official Ford's Theater plush wild turkey, Lincoln Logs, the A. Lincoln Cookbook, and a T-shirt showing Lincoln listening to an iPod. And Bill O'Reilly's book in which Lincoln wins a Peabody Award while meeting with General Douglas MacArthur and listening to his iPad. Our runner-up, Congressman Hal Rogers, Republican of Kentucky, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. The GOP majority on that committee has just tacked on to a spending bill the unraveling of proposed tightening of federal school lunch programs by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as a result of which this would be considered a vegetable. Correct. The tomato paste on pizza, say Republicans, must be considered a vegetable. Inexplicably, the Republicans seem to be kowtowing to the people who make frozen pizzas for schools, but they're dressing it up as their dedication to prevent overly burdensome and costly regulations. Jimmy, eat your vegetables, your spinach and your beans and your pizza. Our winner, speaking of pizza, or as her husband called it, sissy pizza, vegetable pizza, Gloria Cain, wife of Herman. He may have trotted her out after all to do an interview with Greta Van Susteren on the political whorehouse that is Fox News, and she may have said all the right things, but the eyes don't lie.
Would he be a good president? I think he would. I think he'd be a great president. Just think he would? Because, yeah.
And that, kids, is where that phrase, damning him with faint praise, comes from. Gloria, do you think it's a good pizza? Yes. Just yes? Uh-huh. Cain, today's worst person in the world. Every time a GOP candidate emerges as the frontrunner, something happens that knocks them right back down. Michelle Bachmann and her husband's pray away the gay counseling, Rick Perry and his inability to remember what was behind his mental door number 3. And in our number 1 story, here we go again. Herman Cain continues to try and dig out after someone hit his pause button during the response to a question on Libya. And today, after 3 years of proposing jail for any politician associated with Freddie Mac, it turns out Newt Gingrich has been paid handsomely by Freddie Mac. Gingrich has managed to float his way to the top of recent polling, mostly by process of elimination. His descent probably began today when it was revealed that he had received at least $1.6 million as a consultant for Freddie Mac between 1999 and 2008. Or did he?
First of all, it wasn't paid to me. Gingrich Group was a consulting firm that had lots of people doing things, and we offered strategic advice.
So some other Gingrich. But even if it were him, he doesn't see a problem with that.
As Speaker, I had a different role in life. As a former Speaker, I'm a private citizen, and I'm allowed to offer strategic advice.
So it wasn't him, it was his consulting group, but if it had been him, it would be okay because he was a private citizen. Most likely they paid him because as a former Speaker, he has connections to people on Capitol Hill and would be able to lobby for them for favorable treatment. That seems fine. It's not as if anyone has to go to jail for that.
You want to put people in jail, I want to second what Michelle said. You ought to start with Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, and let's look at the politicians who created the environment, the politicians who profited from the environment, and the politicians who put this country in trouble. In Barney Frank's case, go back and look at the lobbyists he was close to at Freddie Mac.
Meanwhile, the Kaine train is still trying to get back on the tracks after his disastrous meeting with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel editorial board, where he could not seem to remember anything about Libya. However, where he lacks knowledge on Libya, he clearly had been thoroughly briefed on Iran.
If you look at the topography of Iran, where are you going to strike? It's very mountainous.
Apparently he doesn't know that our armies are not led by Genghis Khan, and we now have the ability to fly over mountains and stuff. He really needs help with foreign policy. Maybe he could get himself an expert to help him avoid embarrassing himself, a modern-day Henry Kissinger.
Dr. Kissinger turned my offer down to be Secretary of State.
Kaine later said he was just joking about offering the job to Kissinger, who would be 89 during the next inauguration. Fortunately for Mr. Kaine, he has the best staff in the business, and they crafted the perfect response to any further questions about his flubs.
Mr. Kaine, do you think the Libya comments reinforce the idea that you don't have a thorough understanding of foreign policy?
999.
Perhaps he should stick with 999 for everything. He might have avoided more situations like the one just today in Miami's Little Havana.
How do you say
Yeah, it's Spanish. It's not Cuban. Cuba is a country. They speak Spanish in Cuba. Sometimes I wonder what's going on inside that head. Luckily, the folks over at The Late Show were able to give us a brief inside look at the mind of Herman Cain.
Here now is what happened to Herman Cain's brain. Watch.
So you agreed with President Obama on Libya or not?
Okay, Libya.
Joining me now, Countdown contributor, founder of Daily Kos, Markos Moulitsas. Good to see you in person, sir.
It's great to be here in person.
I'll start with Mr. Cain. He seems to be glorying in his ignorance here. I mean, on top of everything else that we just showed, he's now insisting that he's not supposed to know anything about foreign matters. Seriously?
Yeah, we've spent the last election just going on and on about how Obama wouldn't be ready to lead because that call at 3 o'clock in the morning would put the nation in peril. You have a guy here who doesn't know anything about Libya, which was the only foreign policy story of the entire summer practically. We were at war. He can't even talk about that.
Gingrich, meanwhile, is obviously he's become the front runner in at least one poll, meaning he must drop.
He will drop.
But I'm just saying, it's now his turn to. It was his turn to be leader, number one. So now he's had 48 hours and he's ready to drop. Politicians associated with Freddie Mac should go to jail. Chris Dodd, Barney Frank. He's associated with Freddie Mac to the tune of $1.6 million. That's like 2 credit lines at Tiffany. So how come he didn't just volunteer and go to jail today?
I think he'd do us all a favor if he did do that.
Yeah.
To me, it's amazing that you have a politician who knows he's involved in this stuff, yet goes out and talks about complete nonsense to his Republican Party base, knowing that they don't care, that they'll look over anything. If I were him, I would have bragged about it. I'd talk about all the money I made, because really that's what these guys pretend that they really believe in, right? So brag about it. Don't talk about people going to jail. Say, those people who made out like I did, these are the people who should be president.
Right, because he's trying to get the support of people who believe, to quote myself, sorry about that from last night, that this country exists where everything has a price tag on it. That's what they're looking for. Why he seems to be, for some reason, trying to get away with something that they're willing to let him get away with. Is that the problem with the Republican field, that they will not embrace the turdness of their supporters? No, we're good with that. You want to beat up on some minority group? You want to make money where you shouldn't have? No, we're good with that. That's what we're here for.
And maybe they just don't quite understand just how crazy their base is. They just can't believe it. I mean, is that really possible? I mean,
underestimating the insanity of the American Republican Party.
And Kane's the only one I think that really doesn't, which is why he continues to embrace the craziness and the fact that he is ignorant.
How do you say delicious in Cuban?
Yeah, I want to shoot myself in the head after hearing that. That's unbelievable. This guy's running for president, and people still think he's credible. That's the amazing part.
The end of this, we assume the beginning of the self-destruction of Newt, after the self-destruction of Perry, after the self-destruction of Bachmann, after the self-destruction of if Romney were ever actually the lead.
And Donald Trump. Don't forget Donald Trump.
Oh, God, I tried to. Does this end up back where we started? Is it Romney eventually because there'll be nobody else there, or is somebody going to jump in? What's going to happen?
And you wonder if there's going to be a merry-go-round where they start going around in circles, and maybe Michelle Bachmann gets a second shot at it, because they really do not want Mitt Romney. Because no matter what happens to everybody else, Romney's still stuck in those high 20s, low 30s. He's not moving anywhere. It's a question of who else is going to take that mantle. And to me, my worst nightmare, to be honest, is that not Mitt Romney really never gels. Nobody really stands forth, and then Mitt Romney wins the nomination by default.
Why is that your worst nightmare? Because he's reasonable?
Well, he's if you look at the polling right now, he clearly polls best against Obama. Obama beats in most places that matter, but he polls best, and he doesn't have the obvious flaws. I mean, you could talk about all this flip-flopping and lack of character and all that, but that's not as dramatic as talking about Keynes or Bachmann's or Donald Trump's or all those guys.
And I don't speak Cuban. The founder and publisher of Daily Kos, Countdown contributor Markos Moulitsas, a pleasure again to see you in the flesh, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's it. We're out of time. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night. Good luck.